We all have the ability to come up with brilliant things. The hard part is doing the work, and I would never want to give my car to a mechanic that has never actually worked on a vehicle, but knows in theory that, hey, you should probably make sure this thing runs, right? To me, it's the same concept. If it's just as easy for you to walk over and say, we would love to have this really long-winded article about X subject. It's like, well, great. I'm happy to take a look at it when you write it.
Welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast, hosted by Bernie Borges. This is the podcast for the modern marketer who wants to hear from their peers in the trenches and the occasional analyst or rockstar influencer sharing strategies and tactics about what's working in modern marketing. Be sure to listen to the end of each episode for Bernie's summary and takeaways so you can plan your next move in your own modern marketing journey.
Hey there, welcome to episode 239 of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. I'm Bernie Borges, CMO of Valuer, and your host. Hey, thanks for listening. Hey, my guest on this episode is Taylor Ryan, CMO of Valuer. Taylor, welcome to the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Hey, Bernie, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I love this topic that we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about why every marketing department should act like its own agency. Love that. But before we dive into that, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself and Valuer? Who's Valuer?
I've been in the startup scene for almost 12 years. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I've been living in Copenhagen, Denmark for the last it's a little over 3 years now.
Nice.
And I've been working, it's a hell of a town. I've been working with Valuer for the last year. And Valuer is kind of this unique blend of taking startups and pairing them with corporate entities, large companies, enterprises. And the concept is either spurring something in the way of collaboration, potentially boosting R&D, or potentially something in the way of M&A. So it's a ton of fun. It's a very dynamic industry when you're kind of working with these fun, really flexible startups. And then you get to also work with these somewhat old school, sometimes large industries that are looking to evolve and innovate. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, wow, that sounds fascinating in and of itself. I can only imagine all the different possibilities that you run across on a daily, weekly basis. Fantastic. Well, thank you for that background on your company. Taylor, let's get into it. So first of all, what is the premise for this topic from your perspective? Why every marketing department should act like its own agency? Let's first talk about the why of that.
I think marketing has evolved so much over the last 5 years. It shifted in a way that you really need to be able to stand and hold your own within the organization from the perspective of you have to be able to do all of the elements of, there's times when I'm doing sales. There's times when we have to do web development. There's times when we have to obviously do what we do in marketing. And you need to have a thick shell on top of that to understand, look, you're going to have on all different sides, you're going to have people asking for things, and you need to be rooted in your own goals within this department in order to scale, in order to be productive, and in order to deliver what you've promised in terms of whether it's KPIs or results in general.
Hey, it's all about results, right? And as you said, marketing has evolved quite a bit. So let's get into it. One of the things that you talk about in this concept, every marketing department should act like its own agency, is you say, Taylor, don't outsource SEM. And of course, there are agencies out there that do SEM, but you say don't outsource it. Why?
I hate to take money out of the pockets of a couple of agencies that are looking to make a buck, but I genuinely believe the different things that you learn when you're running SEM ads about your industry, about your target audience, let alone what different phrases or campaigns tend to work the most, that's stuff that you don't get back from an agency that outsources. Their job is to try to get you something in the way of leads, or maybe it's engagement, or maybe it's potentially traffic. But the concept is that their goals are not the same goals as yours. If you want to learn in terms of what types of patterns you get out of certain types of ads, you have to do the work yourself. And I consistently run into an issue where I'm meeting with other companies that have outsourced this, and they have no idea in terms of the target audiences, which ones perform the best, which means, hey, maybe you should start creating content around these audiences and the certain targets in terms of whether it's job title or geo-targeting, specific areas that tend to be more into what you're doing. You don't get that when you're working with an agency. They say, hey, this month, the CPC was, I don't know, $30. And by the way, we'd like more of your money. I think that's all you're going to get. They're not going to sit there and say this particular type of campaign opens up a lot of new avenues for producing maybe social content to surround it. You're not going to get that unless you're doing the work yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to partially agree with you. I do think you can learn a lot when you're doing it yourself. I think many organizations, marketing organizations, and of course, it's difficult for the two of us to make any statement that's broad-based general statement because marketing teams range in size from one to dozens of people, depending on the size of the company, right?
Been there.
In the industry.
Yeah, I get it.
In some cases, they just don't have the internal resources to do it themselves. And there's also some scenarios where I've seen exactly what you say. The agency is just doing their job, but they're not really giving you the insight. And then in other cases, the marketing team is working closely with the agency. So I can kind of see both sides of the coin, but I do get your point that you can learn a lot when you're doing it yourself. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side of that, and you're absolutely right. I think every case is obviously a little different. And I'm sure there are some amazing agencies out there that provide those teachable moments as well. But I have unfortunately had experiences on the other side of the spectrum where these guys realize that, hey, if we charge a certain amount of money, we get a percentage of that for every month. And so let's continue to spend while we can so that, our end client basically has to foot the bill. And so if optimization was their goal, it wasn't apparent to me. So I've seen that, and I guess maybe it just depends on what agency you work with. And I'm sure there are many very talented and very honest ones. And I've had experiences with maybe some that weren't so much.
Gotcha. Fair. Now, you also make the point, and I really want you to explain this one because on the surface, it's a little peculiar. And you say you can't count on sales. So what do you mean by you can't count on sales?
In general, I mean the sales department. And I know that I'll probably offend a bunch of listeners that are in the sales department or are working closely with sales. My experience has been, especially if you're setting up your tech stack and you need something in the way of a nice marketing funnel with tracking and also showing something in the way of end results when it comes to what channel did these signups or these conversions come from, and what is the avenue or the channel that produces the most revenue. By and large, if you're looking for reports, if you're looking for something in the way of feedback on the leads, you have to set that type of mechanism up yourself. And if your goal is to have a sales team that is meshed in with marketing, I think that's fantastic. But I think you need to realize that these folks have a different set of skills. And many of them are focused on being soft skills, not necessarily the type of skills where it's like, well, of course, we'll put everything into spreadsheets and we'll make sure that you know which leads convert and where they came from. And we'll make sure to deliver regular reports. I haven't found that. And I also find it also incredibly frustrating when you watch leads that have come in and one phone call and then, hey, couldn't get in touch with them. So we went on to the next one, never called them again. It's like, well, that's a little peculiar. So it's kind of on marketing sometimes to set some of the standards of a sales funnel in terms of before you move this into a burned lead or could not contact, what steps did we make sure that we took in order to either try to get in touch with this person or at least go beyond a reasonable doubt that they weren't interested in your product or service. And that seems like work to a lot of salespeople, unfortunately. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but I love to get in and make sure if we're going to work so hard on our side of the aisle to produce these leads that seemingly pop out of existence out of nowhere, I want to make sure they're being worked. I want to make sure that somebody's banging the phone, somebody's shooting up follow emails and making sure to either do demos or whatever the case is with the business model. And sometimes that's entirely on marketing to kind of set the tone for that relationship because the reality is it's work sometimes and people don't love to do it.
Again, I'm going to partially agree with you, and I'm going to say what you said, maybe using some different words, and then you can react to it.
Sure.
I think a lot of what you said comes down to the importance of marketing and sales being aligned together. And a lot of it also comes down to the head of marketing and the head of sales collaborating together. And one of the ways that I've seen your conundrum that you just described, Taylor, which is a real one, I get it. But one of the ways I've seen it addressed is by the use of standards, like you said, SLAs, where marketing and sales, the leaders, sit down and say, okay, here are the criteria that we're going to agree on. A lead is going to get 3 follow-ups before it's abandoned, or whatever the number is. I'm not saying the number's 3. I'm just making that up, right?
Sure.
Or we're not going to deliver a lead until it meets this criteria, right? I think we've all experienced that, especially if you use marketing automation software where you can, set up lead scoring, and until a lead achieves a certain score, it doesn't even go to sales, right? Then there's even other technologies. This is all about the tech stack, right? In terms of how you're using the tech stack. We use a product that's called Conversica, and they are an automated sales development rep that does email follow-up from a sales development rep without it actually coming from a person. It's coming from the system. So it takes some of that follow-up burden off the salesperson and puts more of it on marketing. So the point is that I think through great collaboration between the head of marketing and the head of sales, then some of what you just described can be minimized and can be improved. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think you're right. And, having a really well-defined, sussed out sales process with something in the way of continuity to make sure that there's checks and balances, as you said, with, either 3 follow-ups, or you make sure to say, hey, whenever we're following up, either we're using webhooks and everything is seen inside of your CRM, or you got to put in the notes. And Here is the structure in which we put in the notes, It all seems like work sometimes, but man, it's so much more worth it when everybody's aligned. So
Exactly.
You're absolutely right. Every department is different, but my experience has been, if you can get everybody on the same page, man, it's so much more streamlined and smooth. It's difference and night and day.
I think the other point on this is when sales understands that they're going to benefit from it, then they're more likely to cooperate on what's needed from them. But it needs to come from sales management. It can't only come from the head of marketing. The head of sales needs to communicate the why it's beneficial to them. And then, of course, the head of marketing, the head of sales need to put the processes in place. So I think we're good on this one. Let's move to the next one because we've got several we want to cover here within this episode. And this next one that you've listed for our discussion, Taylor, is everyone has ideas. Everybody's got great ideas, but we in marketing execute. So give that one some meat.
I hate the idea guy, and I love Gary Vaynerchuk, and he has a bunch of rants about this specific topic as well. But I genuinely believe this, and I can't tell you how many different startups that I've experienced where every day somebody comes in and has this idea. And it's consistent. It's every day. And it's always a handful of guys within every organization. They're like, hey, you guys should think about putting out, an ebook. And it's like, great idea, Deborah. We'll put that down. It's fantastic. We never thought to do that.
Right.
But the reality is we all have the ability to come up with brilliant things. The hard part is doing the work, and I would never want to give my car to a mechanic that has never actually worked on a vehicle, but knows in theory that, hey, you should probably make sure this thing runs, right? To me, it's the same concept. If it's just as easy for you to walk over and say, we would love to have this really long-winded article about X subject. It's like, well, great. I'm happy to take a look at it when you write it. But, the amount of effort that it takes to do everything these days, you have to have somewhat of an understanding that it's not by magic that a lot of this stuff takes place. It never will be. And so coming in and saying, hey, when you get a moment, please build this campaign. It's like, all right, for what? Give me a reason why, and also understand that we can't drop everything that we're doing in order to supplement this focus of yours, this moment. And I can't tell you how many bad, crazy ideas. Like, hey, let's do a Christmas wrap, huh? We'll get everybody together. We'll do a Christmas wrap. I'm like, absolutely not. Stop. This is not helpful. And sometimes we have bad ideas, but we have to work those things out. And the reality is you sometimes do experience bad ideas, but you learn from them and say, great, never doing that again. And I think it's very easy for everybody to walk around and say, I'm brilliant. I have thoughts on everything. Here are my thoughts on this. And that doesn't happen in other departments, by the way. I find it to be almost an exclusively marketing kind of thing. Product gets a little bit of it too, but man, it's frustrating.
Yeah. So I'm not going to give you any mixed opinion on that. I'm totally with you on that. I think anybody that's been in marketing for any period of time has experienced that. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone has ideas. And then the whole point of, we in marketing have to execute. And let's face it, Taylor, anybody that's in marketing knows that execution takes a lot of planning and it takes time. And oftentimes people outside of marketing, without really even naming a specific function in the company, a lot of times they don't understand how much planning and time it takes to execute on ideas and promotions and campaigns and strategies and so forth. So, yep, I'm with you on that one. The next one is an interesting metaphor. So you say, hey, be the Swiss Army knife. What do you mean by that?
I've always tried to explain marketing in certain spaces where I'm either dealing with non-marketers or interns. And I always look at marketing as basically a broad spectrum of different systems. And the idea is that if you learn one system, you can apply it to the others. There is no real island when it comes to any of the things that we do within marketing. But if you start to understand this is how you do content, then you can start applying that to SCM. If you understand a bit of SCM, you might actually be able to understand some of the more technical sides of SEO. So the whole concept is that all of these things require learning at least one element pretty well and then starting to do these other things. And that's what ends up happening. Let's say we produce a blog post, and my focus on blog posts is anywhere from 3 to sometimes 10,000 words. But all of a sudden I'm bringing in, great, so we need an infographic to go in there. I want to make sure there's an element of video using either Lumen 5 or another tool that I can basically run it up real quickly and have it live. I need to understand basically some of the finer elements of HTML and CSS if I'm doing something more advanced on a blog post. And I mean, we're talking about 5 different areas at this point just to go into one content piece. You need to be capable of doing a little bit of everything. And as you get further down in your career, you should be capable of turning around and saying, great, I know how to do everything within Photoshop, so let me pull my Photoshop up and I'll make a nice little infographic to go along with my detailed blog post. You have to be capable of switching things up and figuring things out. And I think that's what makes you valuable. You know, my granddad always said, if you're really good at what you do, you're never going to be jobless, right? And so you never see a jobless mechanic that is a master mechanic. It doesn't happen. You know,
Yeah.
If you're really good, you never have to worry about it. And I think everybody should strive for that. I think having one area of expertise is important, but I think you also need to be applicable to the others that you play with.
Yeah. And it really reminds me of the new name of this podcast, the Modern Marketing Engine Podcast. You know, I think what you've just described is a key element of modern marketing. And that is that because marketing has become so broad and contains so many elements that you've mentioned here, that the marketing team functioning as its own internal agency needs to have that skill set. I don't remember the actual episode number, but probably 20 or 30 episodes ago, I did an episode with the head of digital marketing at Vonage, and it was all focused on the skills that are needed in the marketing department, right? The modern marketing department. And I think you just really kind of touched on that, right? A piece of content that you repurpose, and it's going to need other elements of video and HTML and CSS and maybe Photoshop, etc. And so you characterize that as the Swiss Army knife. I like that. That's I think a relevant characterization, Taylor.
Yeah, it's funny while you're saying that. I was just thinking of a conversation I had earlier this week with one of our videographers. And, you know, the world of SEO for video has really it's expansive, and it's continuing to get more crazy and more interesting the more that you try to find how you can become more found or more searchable. And using SRT files, caption files on natively uploading into Facebook and LinkedIn is incredibly important. And all of a sudden you're explaining SEO techniques to somebody that thought they were just doing purely video production and arts. And they dig it. You know, they're like, oh, this is so crazy. I didn't realize I'm now doing SEO. And that's part of the magic of being in marketing too, is you get to learn other things.
Yeah, exactly. You never stop learning. Your next one is marketing can be a thankless job. So before I comment on that, you go first. What do you mean by marketing can be a thankless job?
The more that we're going through this, I feel like I sound like super jaded. I love my job. I kid you not. I know it sounds like I don't, but like this is what I enjoy. Like I'm not into like bird watching. I don't do CrossFit. Like this is my version of like wrenching on old cars on the weekends. I mean, this is what I love. And it sometimes is one of those things You don't do it to have a slap on the back and somebody go, "Atta boy, way to go." They don't think of that. They think of, "Hey, great, we have a new sale over here," or "We've acquired a new customer," or "Something has happened on this side of the aisle," or "A new feature has been launched." But it's very rare that somebody comes over and says, "Hey, way to go. Thanks a lot, marketing." And it's almost never specifically geared towards the individual in the department. And, I try to figure out what motivates every one of the people that work for me. And everybody's different. I do find that it's kind of this younger generation that needs something in the way of accolades, or at least being pointed out to say, "Hey, you're doing the right thing. Way to go."
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that information doesn't reach them, even if they've done a kick-ass blog post and somebody glances towards the marketing department and says, "Hey, this one was great. We got this really cool sign up out of this deal." And I find that almost, it doesn't reach the end person that matters the most, the person that put in the work. And so I always find it to be a bit of a thankless job, because there is no big celebration. There's no bonus attached most of the time to a lot of the stuff we do in marketing. And I think we have to be understanding of that and realize that there is no finish line to this race. The finish line just keeps moving. As soon as you finish this podcast, you're on to the next one. Yep. There is no job done.
Yeah, I generally agree. And the only thing I'll add to that, in the interest of time, is that so much of what we do in modern marketing is behind the scenes execution detail, really in the weeds. We mentioned earlier, in Photoshop and CSS and HTML and all that. And few people, if any, want to know anything about that. It's no different than people in finance, right? They're doing a whole bunch of number crunching, and they could probably say the same thing, that it's a thankless job and that nobody would appreciate all the number crunching that they do. But what they do is important. So again, I get the point. And I think the biggest point is we have to motivate the people on the marketing team to give them the recognition and the accolades and the reinforcement that, they're doing the right thing, provided they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the metaphor that I love using is, I don't want to be the guy waiting underneath the basket, cherry picking and getting into the highlight reel for basically doing a layup. I want to be the guy that fakes 3 defenders out of their shoes and breaks one guy's ankles on my way to pass the ball to that guy. That to me is a better team player, and that's what I want to be thought of and known for.
I'll be back in a moment with the rest of my conversation with Taylor Ryan. Hey, check out this statistic. Recent research shows that 98% of marketers believe that personalization is important in their messaging, but only 12% think that they're doing it right. So where's the disconnect? Look, we all want to know which words drive the greatest desired response from an email or a landing page or even a sales proposal. Join Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer at Corporate Visions, and yours truly, Bernie Borges, CMO of Ingresso, for a live webinar on February 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to share new research featuring results from a rigorous academic study and simulation that's going to help you confidently pick the right way to refer to your audience and to get them to take immediate action. Now, as a bonus, you'll also see the results of an initial field test that delivers surprising results when it comes to the level of personalization effort that's required to maximize click-through rates. Now, if you're listening to this after February 19th, no worries, we'll send you the webinar recording playback. Just go to vengresso.com/events and register to attend live or to get the recording playback. Now, of course, we'll link that up in our show notes page for this episode at vengresso.com. All right, we've got 2 more, and I'm watching our time here. So this next one here is marketing needs resources or nothing gets done. Well, okay. Yeah. You want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I've said it many times. Marketing, I genuinely believe, could build a house if that was the task that was assigned to us. We'll figure it out. But there's a million things that need to happen prior to that. And if it's, as you referred to earlier, one-person department, you cannot expect to have the type of growth that you would see if it was a 5, 10, or even 30-person environment. But it's also sometimes you're only as good as the tools that you're using. So if I don't have access to Hrefs, then it's going to be really difficult for me to start tracking some of my competitors and also using the skyscraper technique, or aggregating a lot of backlinks and then using my competitors' dead backlinks in order to get more links. There's a million different ways around this, but I need something in the way of a budget to be able to run campaigns. I need money for tools. And I also need the people there that can actually help out. If you try to do everything yourself, you will consistently fail. And I think there's a lot of elements of learning and leadership that go into running something in the way of a marketing department, because we often, and I fall victim to this all the time, I know that I could do a lot of this stuff myself, but if I tried to, I'd go crazy. So sometimes you kind of have to take your hands off the wheel and say, look, don't scratch the car, but, best of luck. And I hope you can do as good or close to what I would have done myself. And I think that's a really hard thing to get other people to understand. But in the broad sense, resources in terms of money, resources in terms sometimes time, but also just people, getting somebody else to fill in and help you kind of rise in terms of content or whatever the task is.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that is the people and the skills, because again, modern marketing has become complex and technical and data centric, and it takes both people and tools and skills. And so you've touched on all that. So completely agree with that. The last one here is one that's very near and dear to me. And so why don't you kick off this part of our conversation as we kind of get close to the wrap of this episode? Marketing has evolved.
Yeah, I think people, when they think of marketing, unfortunately, they still have kind of this vestige of like either Mad Men or like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, where it's like, yeah, cute. Like you guys make pictures and stuff, right? And it's like, yeah, no, not really. And obviously, if you look at some of the best marketers today and some of the really well-known growth hackers, you'll see that these guys are technical, really technical. And so, the first time that I ended up scraping a few different sites, event sites, I used a Python script, and I was shocked that it wasn't as difficult as I thought it was. Every mountain seems like impossible to climb before you do it. But it was shocking that I'm doing Python scripts. Amazing, And it's one of those things that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that never would have been asked of you. You're supposed to be the artsy-fartsy creative.
Right.
And now you can't get away with that. You have to be knowledgeable in a lot of different areas in order to be somewhat successful. And new areas keep popping up, and you have to continue to learn and digest and move on, And it's never a dull moment, because everything that works today, 2 years from now, probably won't,
Yeah, not to mention, and I've covered this on previous episodes, the rise of AI in marketing, just as one of many, many examples of how marketing has evolved. The one thing that I'll just add, again, in the interest of keeping it brief, is that there was a statement made recently. I don't recall exactly who said it. It was an IBM person who stated that by 2020, the head of marketing, now this was in enterprises, so large companies, the head of marketing is going to spend more on technology than the CIO will spend. So just as a proof point that we in marketing, modern marketing, we need a lot of technology in order for us to deliver on the marketing strategies and tactics that can be measured and reach the audience that we need to reach.
Very fair. Or stop buying fancy lattes, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. But no, I agree. It's crazy. And that's where I think we're heading as well. It's fascinating how many new tools pop up, and you're just kind of looking around going, where am I going to find the time?
Yeah.
Every time that I go on Product Hunt, I'm like, oh, I want to try this. There's a million different things out there that you could, at any given point, blow your budget in 2 days,
That's right. All right. So Taylor, we're at the point in the podcast where I'm going to do a recap. I'm going to try to keep it brief because we're getting close to our time here. And then at the end of my recap, I'll ask you to fill in any holes or elaborate on something and just kind of keep it brief here so we can bring this episode to a wrap. And of course, we are here to talk about on this episode why every marketing department should act like its own agency. And we began with an introduction to your company, Valuer. Really interesting company. You're out in Copenhagen. You're doing a blend of pairing startups and large enterprises to explore collaboration, R&D, M&A. And then we got into the meat of it, why marketing departments really need to be thinking and acting like its own agency. You said that marketing departments shouldn't outsource their SEM. There's too much learning that you give up if you outsource your SEM. You also said that you can't rely on sales entirely in terms of, getting the input that you need from them. So, we kind of talked about how there needs to be a lot of collaboration and sales needs to provide input into the CRM so that marketing can get the data and the insights that's needed. We also talked about how everyone has ideas, but it's marketing's responsibility to execute. So again, marketing can't just drop everything just because someone has an idea. And sometimes the ideas are good and sometimes they're bad anyway. So it's about really marketing driving the strategy, again, in collaboration with sales. You also said be the Swiss Army knife. And that's really about marketing is such a broad spectrum of different disciplines. So we've got to really understand all those disciplines and how even just one piece of content can touch many aspects of marketing and technology, such as a blog and a video, and the fact that it's deployed across websites and social, and there's, imagery and Photoshop is needed, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's you've got to have the broad spectrum of marketing, talent, and technologies. And then we talked about how marketing can be a thankless job. And, we in marketing do it because we love it, but it's not a job that we often get the high fives and the way to goes. And so we need to recognize that because we're always on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, but we need to motivate our people as well and make sure that they're getting the recognition and the reinforcement that they need to stay motivated. And then we talked about how marketing needs resources or nothing gets done, right? So marketing is very detail oriented. So we need tools, we need technologies, we need people, we need budget, we need processes. So we need all of that. And then we talked about the last point was the evolution of marketing, which again is back to the modern marketing theme of my own podcast here. Some people still think of marketing as kind of old school Madison Avenue. Like you said, we design pretty pictures, but marketing has evolved to be very technical and very strategic and very metrics driven. And there's many, many, many areas of marketing that are just coming on the scene almost on a daily, weekly basis. So we've got to stay on top of that. It can be both invigorating and also challenging at the same time. So Taylor, that's my recap. Again, I kept it brief. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, for having me on. I think podcasts like yours are really, it's kind of what gets me jazzed up. I try to listen to a few between my commute. And yeah, I love the concept of continuing to kind of make a community flourish and give them at least new opportunities to learn, find something that they never knew about or never knew existed, and actually utilize it and put it into their own mix, their own world, their own company. I dig it. So thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Where can my listener connect with you online to connect with you and learn about what you've got going on?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't really use my Twitter. Most of these other platforms these days, just too busy. But I connect with everybody. So if you want to look up Taylor Ryan, I'm sure there's a lot of Taylor Ryans out there, but I'm the one in Copenhagen.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll include that in the show notes because, I'm sure there's more than one Taylor Ryan out there. So we'll certainly include that in our show notes. My listener knows that. So Taylor, on that note, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast. I really appreciate it.
This wraps up another inspiring episode of the Modern Marketing Engine podcast. If you want to share this podcast with a friend, let them know that we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Podcasts. And we love 5-star reviews. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. You can read the show notes for each episode at vengresso.com. While you're there, sign up to receive the show notes delivered to your inbox through our weekly alerts. And be sure to also check out our Selling with Social podcast hosted by Vengresso CEO, Mario Martinez Jr. Again, you'll find our show notes at vengresso.com. And that's one S in Vengresso. Tune in again next week when Bernie Borges brings you another inspiring interview to help you thrive on your modern marketing journey.